When you hear the words plastic surgery, be honest for a second. Where does your mind immediately go?
Oh, it's usually Beverly Hills, reality TV.
Right, exactly. We have this cultural shorthand, this idea that plastic surgery is essentially just vanity sizing for the human body.
Yeah, the nip-tuck effect. We tend to view it as luxury medicine. But
Yeah.
if you actually look at the training, specifically the material we're covering today, that perception evaporates pretty fast.
It really does. And that is exactly what we are doing today. We are taking a deep dive into a really fascinating stack of research centered on the second edition of Keynotes on plastic surgery.
By Adrian Richards and Hywel Dafid.
Yes, Richards and Dafid. And to be clear for everyone listening, this is not a coffee table book of before and after photos.
No, definitely not.
This is a high-level review text. It's designed for surgeons who are preparing for their final board exams.
It is incredibly dense. I mean, we are talking about a field that requires you to be part engineer, part molecular biologist, and honestly, part psychiatrist. The text covers literally everything from the cellular signaling of wound healing all the way to the legal philosophy of patient consent.
So the mission for this deep dive is to look at the human body through the eyes of a reconstructive surgeon. We're going to completely dismantle that idea of just beautification.
Right. We're looking at the general principle.
Exactly. How you rebuild a human being, whether that's after a severe burn, a trauma like a car accident, or a congenital defect.
And to really do that, we have to start with the most basic unit of the job, which is the wound itself.
Yeah, the text breaks down wound healing into 3 distinct phases. And it's really not just, you cut yourself and it magically gets better. It's a very specific biological sequence.
It is a highly choreographed biological dance. First, you have inflammation. That is the immediate reaction, the emergency crews coming in and clearing the debris.
Okay.
Then you move into proliferation, which is where the rebuilding actually happens. The scaffolding goes up. And finally, remodeling.
And that remodeling phase is where things can get really tricky. The text makes a massive distinction between 2 types of scars that I think most people just confuse.
Hypertrophic scars and keloids.
Right. I always just thought they were synonyms for a bad scar.
A lot of people do. But the biological behavior is totally different. A hypertrophic scar is kind of like a rowdy guest who stays in their lane. It's red, it's raised, and it usually appears within about 8 weeks of the injury.
But it stays put.
Yes, that's the key. It stays strictly within the boundaries of the original wound, and eventually it calms down and regresses.
Whereas a keloid is, well, the book describes it as a lot more aggressive.
A keloid is essentially a tumor-like growth. It does not respect boundaries at all. It grows beyond the margin of the original injury and physically invades the healthy tissue next door.
That sounds intense.
It is. And crucially, unlike hypertrophic scars, keloids rarely fade on their own. They are notoriously hard to treat.
Because if you cut them out,
The trauma of the surgery itself can actually stimulate them to come back even bigger.
which is wild. Now, speaking of cutting things out, there is a very practical trick in the book for surgeons to avoid bad scarring in the first place. They call it the pinch test.
Oh, this is geometry saving your skin. Literally.
Wow.
So before a surgeon makes an incision to remove a lesion, they need to know exactly which way the skin wants to stretch.
Right, because skin has natural tension.
Exactly. So if you pinch the skin where you plan to cut, it should buckle into a clean transverse fold. That tells you that you are cutting parallel to the skin's natural tension lines.
And if it forms an S shape?
A sigmoid shape. Yeah, that is a massive red flag.
So what does that mean?
It means you are fighting the tension. If you cut there, the skin is going to constantly pull the wound apart as it tries to rest. And that constant tension leads to a wide, ugly scar. It's a super simple physical check, but it prevents long-term aesthetic damage.
So skin follows these predictable physical rules. But nerves seem to have a mind of their absolutely own.
They really do.
The section on nerve repair was just wild. The text gets incredibly technical with these Seddon and Sunderland classifications, but the concept that really stood out to me was neurotropism.
Yes, neurotropism.
Sure.
This is one of those concepts that genuinely feels like science fiction.
Right.
When a nerve is cut, the part that's still connected to the brain, the proximal end, sprouts these little microscopic structures called growth cones.
Sort of like roots on a plant.
Sort of, but these roots can essentially smell.
Wow.
Neurotropism is the idea that these regenerating nerve fibers can chemically sense the correct path to their specific target organ. They are actively trying to find their way back home.
But the book implies it's not a guaranteed success, right?
Yep.
It's not magic.
No, it's a brutal numbers game. If those growth cones head in the wrong direction, they atrophy and die. Only the ones that find the exact chemical trail survive. It is literal survival of the fittest occurring inside your own arm.
That perfectly explains why nerve injuries are so unpredictable in how they recover. Now, contrast that dynamic process with cartilage. The text seems pretty down on cartilage's ability to heal at all. It basically says if you break cartilage, good luck.
Cartilage is the diva of the tissue world. It has no intrinsic blood supply, no lymphatics, and no nerves.
So how does it survive?
It eats by diffusion. It basically just sits there waiting for nutrients to drift in from the surrounding fluid.
Meaning if you damage it, it can't really call for help because there are no roads leading to it?
That's a great way to put it. It has no supply line. That is why ear injuries or joint damage are so much harder to fix than a broken bone. Bone has an amazing blood supply. Cartilage is strictly on its own.
Okay, so we have established the biology of repair. Now I want to open up the surgeon's toolkit because sometimes biology fails and you need mechanical assistance.
Right.
I was absolutely shocked to see a section in a modern 21st century medical text dedicated to leeches.
Hirudo medicinalis. It sounds totally medieval, doesn't it?
It really does.
But they are actually still the absolute gold standard for a very specific plumbing problem called venous congestion.
Can you explain that? Why on earth would a modern surgeon need a swamp creature?
Think about it like this. Imagine you've reattached a severed finger. You stitch the arteries back together. Those are the input pipes and blood flows in. Great.
Okay.
But the veins, the drain pipes, are incredibly clumsy and much harder to connect. So blood is pumping in, but it can't get out.
Oh, I see.
The finger turns dark purple, it swells, and it will eventually die of congestion.
So the leech acts as a temporary drain pipe.
It's a living biological valve. The surgeon attaches it, and it feeds for about 30 to 60 minutes. But here's the clever part. It's not just the physical sucking. Their saliva contains powerful anticoagulants.
So it keeps bleeding even after the leech is gone.
Exactly. It keeps the wound slowly oozing, which buys the body enough time to grow brand new veins.
That is amazing. And there was a very specific detail in the text about the bite mark that I just could not get out of my head.
The Mercedes-Benz sign.
Yes.
Their jaw structure has 3 parts, so it leaves a perfect 3-pointed star on the skin.
But there is a massive flashing warning label attached to using these things. The book makes it very clear you cannot just rip them off when you're done.
Never. If you pull a leech off by force, 2 terrible things happen. 1, the tiny teeth might break off and stay in the wound.
Yikes.
And 2, the mechanical stress makes the leech vomit. It will regurgitate its gut bacteria, specifically a bug called Aeromonas hydrophila, straight into your sterile surgical site.
That is a nightmare scenario for an infection.
Absolutely. So you either wait for them to get full and drop off naturally, or you use an alcohol wipe to annoy them into releasing. But you never, ever yank.
Okay, from the medieval, let's pivot straight to the futuristic. Lasers. The book explains the actual physics behind them, stimulated emission where photons basically reinforce each other. But what really caught my eye was the safety protocol, because these are not laser pointers.
Not even close. These are class 4 medical devices. The energy density is massive, and the text highlights a specific danger that is genuinely terrifying: retinal damage from invisible beams.
All right, because you don't even blink.
Exactly. If the laser is operating outside the visible light spectrum, your brain literally does not register the flash.
So your eye doesn't know to protect itself.
You don't get the blink reflex. You can burn a permanent hole right through your retina before you even realize the laser was firing.
Yeah.
That is why the safety goggles in those operating rooms aren't just a suggestion. They are the only thing standing between the surgeon and instant blindness.
That is terrifying. All right, let's talk about materials that actually go inside the body. Implants. The text traces this fascinating history from using gold all the way to titanium.
Yeah, gold was historically used for eyelid weights in patients with facial palsy.
Eyelid weights.
Yeah, because gold is heavy and chemically inert. If a patient can't close their eye due to nerve damage, the gravity of the gold weight helps pull the lid shut.
That is so clever.
It is. But titanium is the real heavy hitter today, and that's because of a property called osseointegration.
Meaning it integrates with the bone.
Perfectly. Bone absolutely loves titanium. It doesn't just tolerate the metal. The bone cells actually grow into the microscopic rough surface of the implant. It locks it into the skeleton permanently.
But obviously, not all materials play nice. We definitely need to talk about the PIP scandal. The book uses this as a major case study in what happens when you cut corners with materials.
Polyimplant prothese. This is a tragedy of regulation just as much as it is of medicine. This company was using industrial-grade silicone in breast implants.
The text explicitly says it was silicone meant for mattresses.
Mattresses and electronic components, not human bodies. The rupture rates were predictably sky-high, and it caused massive internal inflammation.
But the book also points out that even when you use the exact right medical-grade silicone, the body can still decide to reject it. They discuss this process called capsular contracture.
Right, that's the body building a defensive wall. It's the immune system recognizing a foreign object, saying, I don't know what this is, so I'm going to fence it off.
It forms a shell.
A dense fibrous shell around the implant. And in severe cases, which the text refers to using the Baker classification as grade 4, that shell squeezes the implant so hard that the breast becomes rock solid, highly painful, and visibly distorted.
It's a stark reminder that you can engineer the perfect medical device, but human biology always gets the final vote.
Always.
Speaking of biology getting the last vote, let's go back to the very beginning of human development, the embryology section, the blueprint section of the book.
Yes.
It really drives home the point that plastic surgery isn't just about fixing trauma. A huge part of the field is fixing things that just didn't build correctly in the womb.
And the timing for that building process is incredibly tight. The text notes that the human face forms entirely between the 4th and 8th weeks of intrauterine life.
That is so early. Most people barely even know they are pregnant at that point.
And it's a delicate process of fusion. Think of the face starting as separate tectonic plates. The text calls them processes that have to slide together and fuse perfectly in the middle of the face.
So a cleft lip is essentially just a failure of those specific plates to meet.
Exactly. It is a failure of fusion between the medial nasal process and the maxillary process. It's really important to understand it's not a tear or a cut. It is a gap where the biological bridge was simply never built.
The description of how the ear forms was even more abstract. They call them the hillocks of His.
Named after Wilhelm His. He described these 6 tiny little bumps, the hillocks that appear on the side of the embryo's head.
6 bumps become an ear.
Yes, and they have to migrate, merge, and fold in a very complex, specific origami to form a normal ear. If even just one of those 6 hillocks is slightly off schedule, the entire structure of the ear is malformed.
The precision required is mind-boggling. But my absolute favorite term in the entire book, honestly maybe in all of medical science, is in the limb development section, sonic hedgehog.
I know, it's hard to say it in a clinical setting with a straight face, but it is a profoundly critical protein.
Named literally after the Sega video game character.
It is, but its job is very serious. It lives in a specific area of a developing limb called the zone of polarizing activity.
And what does it do?
Sonic hedgehog is essentially the GPS signal. It tells your developing hand which side is supposed to get a thumb and which side gets a pinky.
So what happens if that GPS signal gets scrambled?
The hand loses its orientation. You can end up with mirror hands, meaning 2 pinkies and no thumb at all.
Yeah.
Or you get extra digits, which is known clinically as polydactyly.
Or macrodactyly, where the digits are giant. The text lists some really intense hand anomalies. There is Dupuytren's disease, which they refer to as the Viking disease.
They call it that because there's a strong genetic link to populations of Northern European descent. It's a condition where the fascia, which is the fibrous sheet of tissue just under the skin of the palm, abnormally thickens and tightens.
And it pulls the fingers down.
It slowly but forcefully curls the fingers down into the palm until they are rigidly stuck. A patient with advanced Dupuytren's literally cannot place their hand flat on a table.
And then there is the floating thumb. Puthfloten.
Puthflotend.
Yeah.
That is a congenital condition where a thumb is attached to the hand only by a flimsy, narrow stalk of skin.
So there's no bone inside it.
No bone connection, no tendon function. It's completely useless functionally. And it forces the surgeon to make a really tough choice.
What are the options?
Do you try to meticulously build a bone and tendon structure that completely doesn't exist? Or do you amputate the floating thumb and perform a procedure called pellicization, which basically means migrating the index finger over to turn it into a functioning thumb?
That is incredible problem solving.
Yeah.
And that really leads us into what felt like the most intense physiology in the entire book. We've talked about scars, we've talked about congenital defects, but the section on burns seems like a category all its own.
A major burn is a total systemic catastrophe. It is definitely not just skin deep. The text uses Jackson's burn model to explain the anatomy of the wound itself, and it is a brilliant framework. It divides the burn into 3 concentric zones, kind of like a target.
Right, and the bullseye of that target is the zone of coagulation.
Correct. That tissue is dead. It is fully coagulated by the heat. There is absolutely no saving it. Now, the outermost ring of the target is the zone of hyperemia.
That's the part that's red and angry but will eventually heal on its own.
Yes, exactly. But the real battleground for the surgeon is the middle ring, the zone of stasis.
Stasis meaning it's just paused.
It's teetering right on the edge of survival. It has severely restricted blood flow. If the surgeon and the critical care team manage the patient perfectly, that tissue survives and recovers.
But if they don't?
If the patient gets dehydrated or their blood pressure drops or they get an infection, that zone of stasis dies, and the permanent, irreversible burn gets much bigger.
And the patient's own body is fighting you the entire time. The text describes this as a metabolic crisis.
It triggers a massive hypermetabolic state. The body essentially panics. It calculates that it needs astronomical amounts of energy to heal this huge wound.
So what does it do?
If you don't feed the patient an absolutely massive amount of calories, the body will start cannibalizing its own muscle tissue.
The book called it gluconeogenesis.
Yes, gluconeogenesis. It breaks down perfectly good muscle just to keep the internal engine running.
And the patient is rapidly losing heat, too.
Extremely rapidly. Our skin is our primary insulator. Without it, a burn patient is like a broken radiator. The text points out that a burn unit hospital room has to be kept at tropical temperatures between 28 and 33 degrees Celsius.
For the listeners, that is well over 90 degrees Fahrenheit.
It's sweltering for the staff.
Yeah.
And if you don't keep the room that hot, the patient will burn through all their remaining calorie reserves just shivering, trying not to freeze to death.
It also brings up the fluid resuscitation required. They use something called the Parkland formula.
The math on this is staggering. It's 4 milliliters of fluid multiplied by the patient's body weight in kilograms, multiplied by the percentage of their total body surface area that is burned.
So for a large burn, we are talking about gallons of fluid.
Tens of liters of fluid in the first 24 hours just to keep the heart pumping, because the damaged blood vessels become so leaky that fluid is just weeping out of the bloodstream.
To cover these massive wounds, the text mentions skin substitutes like BioBrain.
Yes, BioBrain is fascinating. It's a synthetic dressing, a silicone film bonded to a nylon fabric coated in porcine collagen.
Pig collagen.
Right. It acts as a temporary artificial skin to stop the fluid loss and block bacteria until the patient is stable enough for real skin grafts.
It really completely changes your perspective on the field. This isn't cosmetic tweaking. This is intense critical care life support. Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle we need to cover, the mind. The ethics and legal section.
This is a crucial section because plastic surgery sits at this very weird, complex intersection of medical need and personal want.
They outline the standard core principles of medical ethics: autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. But the discussion around consent was really interesting to me, specifically the legal shift from the Bolam test to the prudent patient test.
This represents a massive shift in medical law. The Bolam test was the old standard for decades. It basically asked, did the doctor do what a responsible body of other doctors would do?
So it was essentially peer review. The doctors decided what was right.
Exactly. But the prudent patient test flips that entirely. It asks, did the doctor tell the patient what a prudent patient would want or need to know to make an informed decision?
So it violently shifts the power dynamic back to the patient.
Right. It is no longer just about technical correctness in the operating room. It's about deeply understanding what actually matters to the human being lying on the table. Oh, and speaking of consent, the text also specifically references the Family Law Reform Act of 1969 regarding minors.
Right. That allows 16-year-olds to legally give consent to surgical procedures.
Yes, which adds another layer of ethical complexity for the surgeon.
But the surgeon still ultimately has to be the gatekeeper. They have to select the right patients. There was a great, highly specific example in the text about genioplasty chin surgery.
Oh, this blew my mind when I first learned it. Before a surgeon will agree to slide a patient's chin bone forward to improve their side profile, they mandate an X-ray of the roots of the lower teeth.
And what are they looking for?
Any sign of infection or pathology at the root of the tooth? If there is any issue there, the surgery is an absolute contraindication. It is a hard no.
Because the saw blade would hit the infection and spread it into the jawbone.
Exactly. And the patient would potentially lose their front teeth. You cannot perform a surgery to fix an aesthetic complaint if the mechanics of that surgery will destroy basic biological function.
They also heavily flag psychological screening. Body dysmorphic disorder. The text specifically mentions looking out for males seeking rhinoplasty or chin surgery who arrive with, let's say, incredibly rigid aesthetic standards.
Like demanding a perfectly square chin. It is a massive red flag. If a patient brings in a magazine picture of a celebrity and says, "I want this exact nose," or if they secretly believe that a new chin is going to magically save their failing marriage, the reasonable doctor, and that is a specific legal term, must refuse to operate.
Because you aren't a vending machine for body parts. You can't just buy a feature.
You are a medical guardian, and sometimes the absolute best surgery a plastic surgeon will ever perform is the one they firmly decide not to do.
So when we step back and look at the entirety of this deep dive, we have covered the smelling growth cones of severed nerves, the Mercedes-Benz bite of the medicinal leech, the sonic hedgehog GPS protein, and the critical zone of stasis in severe burns. What is the grand through line here for you?
For me, it is that plastic surgery is the ultimate medical discipline of resourcefulness. It is pure, unfiltered pragmatism.
I'm doing whatever it takes.
Exactly. You use a piece of a patient's own rib to carve a new ear that's autogenous tissue. You use a highly engineered silicone sheet to cover a massive burn synthetic material. You use a live leech to drain a congested finger biological assistance.
It is whatever works to safely restore the form and the function of the human body.
Whatever works.
I love that. I want to leave everyone listening with one final image from the source text that felt like a real glimpse into the future of this field. We talked about surgeons carving ribs with scalpels, but the text briefly mentions a concept called tissue engineering.
This is absolutely the new frontier. There is a fascinating mention in the book of a surgeon named Neumeister. Back in 2006, he took an ear-shaped silicone block and surgically implanted it inside a rat.
Wait, inside the living rat?
Yes, he was essentially using the rat's body as a living bioreactor.
For what purpose?
The goal was to force the rat's body to organically grow a rich blood supply of vascular capsule completely surrounding that ear shape.
That is wild.
It is. But it perfectly points to exactly where reconstructive surgery is heading. If we can learn to fully engineer tissues, if we can grow custom skin, cartilage, and maybe even complex composite organs in a lab with their own built-in blood supplies, we fundamentally change the job.
We stop being just fixers who patch people up with scars and titanium.
Exactly. We move from the business of repair directly into the business of regeneration.
Growing spare parts to replace what was lost. It is a truly fascinating look at what is really happening behind the surgical mask. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the real science of plastic surgery. We will see you next time.